Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. Today, we're going to get into something you encounter every single day, probably without even realizing it. It's that deeply ingrained human instinct to form tribes. Right. And we're going to try to understand why we humans are so quick to form groups, show loyalty, and then sometimes view anyone outside that circle with, a little bit of suspicion. So we've got some fascinating research to unpack today about this.
It's like we're hardwired for it.
Yeah.
And the really interesting part is we're not just looking at the behavior itself.
Right.
But we're trying to understand like the evolutionary roots.
Yeah.
Like what possible advantages could have led to these tribal instincts becoming so deeply ingrained in us.
Yeah, it's almost like trying to understand the origins of fire.
Yeah.
Fire can be destructive.
Right.
But it also allowed us to cook, stay warm, ward off predators.
Right.
So is there a flip side to tribalism? What's the evolutionary benefit that might outweigh the potential downsides?
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And one of the most striking images I came across in the research was this thought experiment. Imagine alien scientists observing us, humans. They see us building cities, cooperating, creating these incredible things, but they also see wars and conflicts and prejudice.
Right.
And their conclusion that humans are just another tribal species.
Wow.
Not that different from ants or bees.
Okay, that's a little humbling.
Yeah.
But I see what you mean.
Right.
It's like watching a football game.
Right.
You see such intense loyalty, the joy of victory.
Yeah.
But also, sometimes some pretty ugly behavior towards the opposing team and their fans.
Right. Yeah.
All driven by that sense of us versus them.
Exactly. And this isn't just some modern phenomenon.
Right.
Charles Darwin himself, way back in 1871, was already pondering whether this tribal spirit, this fierce loyalty and willingness to sacrifice for the group might have actually been a driving force in human evolution.
Survival of the fittest tribes.
Yeah.
It's a bit intense.
It is.
But it makes you think.
It does.
So if this tribal instinct is so ancient and so deep-seated, where do we see it show up in our lives today?
Well, the research actually lays out these 8 key findings about how we humans interact in groups, and it gets pretty fascinating.
Okay, let's hear them. All right.
Hit me with these 8 key findings.
First up is something you probably experience all the time.
Okay.
Humans spontaneously categorize people into in-groups and out-groups. And no surprise here.
Okay.
We tend to favor our own.
It's like our brains are constantly drawing lines in the sand, us over here, them over there.
Right. And the research cites studies showing people willingly share resources, even risk their lives for their in-group.
Right.
And this isn't just about family or close friends. We see it with sports fans, political parties, even people grouped randomly in experiments.
Wow. That us versus them dynamic kicks in surprisingly fast.
It's almost automatic, but it's more than just preference, right? It's like we form these deep emotional attachments to those groups.
That's the second key finding.
Okay.
We can have incredibly strong attachments to large symbolic groups, nations, religions, those beloved sports teams. Again, they represent something bigger than just a collection of individuals.
Right.
And we invest emotionally in them.
Yeah.
When our group wins, we feel that surge of pride, like we achieve something.
It's like that sense of belonging, being part of something larger than yourself, which makes me wonder, how do we react to those who aren't quite as devoted to the group? The folks who aren't wearing the team jersey or waving the flag with the same fervor.
Well, that brings us to finding number 3.
Okay.
We really don't like disloyalty.
Okay.
Think about the black sheep of the family.
Right.
Or that teammate who isn't pulling their weight. They're often met with disapproval, even punishment.
You can almost feel that judgment, that sense of betrayal. Like, how dare you question the tribe?
And there's research to back that up.
Oh, really?
One study found that participants were willing to spend a quarter of their earnings just to punish a disloyal group member.
Wow.
That's serious commitment to the in-group.
Yeah.
But you're right. It makes you wonder what happens when we look beyond our own little circle out to those other groups.
Yeah, things probably get a little less rosy when we start talking about how we treat those outside our tribe.
Unfortunately, you're right.
Yeah.
Finding number 4. tackles it head on.
Okay.
Humans have a tendency to, at the very least,
Okay.
look down on outgroup members.
Right.
We're talking prejudice, discrimination,
Yeah.
and in extreme cases, even violence.
Right.
The research suggests we often view outsiders as less trustworthy, less moral,
Yeah.
sometimes even dehumanizing them.
It's a dark side of human nature that we have to acknowledge.
Yeah.
It isn't just a few bad apples. It seems like something deeper is at play.
And finding number 5 reinforces that.
Okay.
It suggests that we often automatically perceive intergroup contexts as competitive and hostile. Even in simple games, individuals playing against other individuals tend to cooperate,
Okay.
but put them in groups and suddenly competition and mistrust skyrocket.
Yeah.
It's like we're primed to expect conflict even when it's not necessary.
It's like that switch flips in our brains and we're suddenly in us versus them mode.
Right.
It's actually kind of scary how easily that happens.
That's the discontinuity effect.
Okay.
It's this fascinating pattern where groups are just inherently more competitive and distrustful
Wow.
than individuals in the same situation.
Okay.
It suggests that our brains operate differently when dealing with them compared to just you or me.
So far, this whole tribal instinct thing is sounding pretty bleak.
Yeah.
Is there any hope for peace and cooperation between groups?
There is actually. Finding number 6 offers a glimmer of hope.
Okay, good.
It acknowledges that intergroup helping does occur
Oh.
when individuals from different groups form friendships
Right.
or work together towards a common goal.
Right.
Those prejudices can start to melt away. Think about successful interfaith dialogues.
Yeah.
Or even those team building exercises where people from different departments
Yeah.
have to collaborate to solve a problem.
So creating a new us
Right.
that transcends the old divisions.
It's
It's like saying, hey, we're all on the same team now,
Right.
working towards this bigger goal.
Exactly. Shared goals and positive interactions
Yeah.
can be powerful tools for breaking down those tribal barriers. But here's where it gets even more interesting.
Okay.
Finding number 7
Okay.
points out something anthropologists and sociologists have observed for a long time.
Okay.
The folks who are often in charge of managing intergroup relations,
Right.
both the conflict and the peacemaking, tend to be.
Wait, are you saying men are more tribal than women?
That's a question the male warrior hypothesis tries to answer.
Okay.
It suggests that men, throughout evolutionary history,
Right.
face different pressures than women, which might have led to a more pronounced tribal psychology in men.
Okay.
But before we get into that,
Okay.
let's touch on the 8th and final key finding.
Right.
It actually broadens our perspective a bit because guess what?
What?
Humans aren't alone in this whole tribalism thing.
You're telling me other animals have tribes too?
Oh yeah.
Wow.
We see similar patterns in other social species like ants, bees, even chimpanzees.
What?
They form coalitions, defend territories,
Wow.
and yes, show aggression towards outsiders.
Interesting.
And again, it's primarily the males who are leading the charge.
So this tribal instinct is deeply ingrained.
Deeply ingrained.
Millions of years of evolution shaping our brains and behaviors.
Absolutely.
It's almost like a software program running in the background, influencing how we see the world and interact with each other.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
But then the question becomes, why?
Right.
What possible evolutionary advantages could have led to this complex?
Right.
And let's be honest, sometimes dangerous psychology.
Yeah.
Why are we programmed for tribalism?
Right.
What's the evolutionary benefit?
That's the million-dollar question.
It is.
And I bet you've got some answers for us.
We'll dive into those possible answers right after this. Stay tuned. We're just getting started. All right, so we've established this tribal instinct is deeply embedded in us.
Yeah.
It's ancient.
Yeah.
It's powerful.
Right.
And it's not unique to humans.
Right.
But the question still lingers.
Yeah.
Why? Why are we wired this way?
Yeah, what possible advantage could this whole us versus them mentality have given our ancestors?
Right.
It seems like it would cause more problems than it solves.
Well, the source material actually presents 3 main explanations for the evolutionary origins of our tribal instincts.
Okay.
Each with its own strengths and weaknesses.
Gotcha.
Okay, let's start with the simplest one.
Okay.
Imagine you're walking through a forest and you see something moving in the bushes.
Okay.
Your brain instantly starts trying to categorize it.
Uh-huh.
Is it a predator? Is it prey? Is it something I can ignore? Or do I need to run for my life?
It's like that fight or flight response kicking in.
Right.
Our brains are constantly trying to assess threats and make snap judgments
Right.
to keep us safe.
Exactly. And the first explanation for tribalism suggests it's just an extension of that basic categorization ability.
Okay.
Our brains are wired to sort things into groups
Right.
to make sense of the world, and that includes people. Friend or foe,
Right.
in-group or out-group.
Right.
It helps us navigate social situations
Okay.
and make quick decisions about who to trust
Gotcha.
and who to avoid.
Okay, so it's all about survival. But wouldn't that mean all group categorizations are equally important? How does our brain know when to trigger that fight or flight response
Right.
for a rival tribe versus, say, a group of elderly people?
That's one of the weaknesses of this explanation.
Okay,
It's a bit too simplistic.
right,
Different categories of people pose different adaptive challenges.
right,
Encountering a rival tribe in a resource-scarce environment
right,
would have required a very different response
right.
than meeting a group of nomads passing through your territory. It's unlikely that a general categorization ability on its own
Yeah.
could explain the specific
Right.
and often intense reactions we have toward certain outgroups.
So while basic categorization might play a role,
Right.
there has to be something more to it.
Yeah.
What's the second explanation?
This one focuses on our deep need for social connection.
Okay.
Humans are incredibly social creatures.
Yeah.
We thrive on cooperation and belonging.
Right.
This theory suggests that our natural drive to help and support our in-group
Okay.
might unintentionally lead to a sense of competition
Right.
or even hostility
Oh.
towards those outside that circle.
Yeah, right.
It's like protecting your own family or community.
Right.
You're naturally more inclined to look out for your own.
Okay. I can see that.
Yeah,
If we're wired to share resources and support those we're close to,
right.
maybe we become a bit wary, even hostile towards those who aren't part of our circle. It's like drawing a boundary to protect what's ours.
Right. But this explanation also has its shortcomings.
Okay.
It doesn't fully account for the sometimes extreme levels of hostility we see between groups.
Right.
Why wouldn't we just be indifferent
Yeah.
or mildly distrustful towards outsiders?
Yeah.
Why go to the lengths of warfare and violence?
It's like there's an extra layer of intensity,
Right.
an emotional charge that goes beyond simply protecting our own.
Exactly. And that's where the third explanation,
Okay.
the one the source material finds most compelling, comes in.
Okay.
It's called the tribal instinct hypothesis. This theory suggests that our tribal psychology isn't just a byproduct
Okay.
of other cognitive processes.
Right.
It's a core part of who we are.
Right.
Shaped by a long evolutionary history
Yeah.
of intergroup conflict and cooperation.
So you're saying this us versus them mentality isn't just an accident. It served a specific purpose in our evolutionary past.
Yeah.
But how could conflict and aggression possibly be beneficial for survival?
Think back to our ancestors.
Yeah.
Small bands of hunter-gatherers navigating a world full of dangers.
Right.
Competition for resources, territory, even mates would have been intense.
Yeah.
Groups that could effectively cooperate within their tribe,
Right. Yeah.
defend themselves against outsiders,
Right.
and even exploit other groups when necessary, would have had a significant survival advantage.
Right.
Over time, this would have created a strong selection pressure,
Okay.
favoring individuals with a tribal mindset.
Survival of the most tribal.
Right.
It's a sobering thought.
It is.
So you're saying that those who are best at forming strong bonds within their group,
Yeah.
quickly identifying outsiders,
Right.
and reacting effectively to potential threats,
Exactly.
were more likely to survive and pass on their genes.
Precisely. And the archaeological evidence supports this.
Oh, wow.
We found fossil evidence of warfare dating back hundreds of thousands of years.
Wow.
This wasn't just some theoretical threat.
Right.
Our ancestors were engaged in violent intergroup conflict
Yeah.
for a very long time.
Wow.
In fact, researchers estimate that 30% of ancestral men died
Wow.
due to violence between groups.
Wow, that's a staggering statistic.
Yeah.
It really highlights the life or death nature of tribal conflicts in our evolutionary past.
It does.
But you mentioned cooperation as well.
Right.
How does that fit into this whole survival of the most tribal idea?
It's not just about aggression.
Okay.
The tribal instinct is also about forming strong bonds within the group,
Right.
working together,
Right.
even sacrificing for the collective good.
Okay.
Cooperation and conflict in a sense, go hand in hand. Think about it.
Yeah.
The ability to band together against a common enemy is just as crucial as the willingness to fight.
So it's like a two-pronged approach. You need that strong internal cohesion, that sense of loyalty and trust within your tribe.
Exactly.
But you also need that wariness, that preparedness to defend your group against outsiders. It's like a delicate balance between cooperation and competition.
Exactly. And this brings us to a fascinating question.
Okay.
If this tribal psychology is so deeply ingrained in us, how does it play out in the modern world? We're not exactly fighting over hunting grounds or battling rival tribes with spears and arrows anymore.
Yeah, it's not like we're living in a constant state of tribal warfare. So how does this ancient instinct manifest itself in our modern globalized society?
That's the real challenge.
Yeah.
We evolved to navigate a world of small competing tribes, but our modern world is vastly different. We live in complex, interconnected societies. We interact with people from all walks of life, from all corners of the globe. Yet that ancient tribal psychology is still ticking away in our brains, influencing how we perceive and react to others, especially those we see as different.
It's almost like we have these Stone Age minds trying to make sense of a 21st century world. No wonder we still struggle with prejudice and conflict. It's like we're running outdated software that's not quite compatible with our current operating system.
That's a brilliant analogy. And you know, one of the most striking examples of this outdated software is the male warrior hypothesis we touched on earlier. It delves into why men throughout history and even today seem to exhibit these tribal instincts more strongly than women.
Okay, I'm really curious to unpack this. It's true that historically men have been the primary players in warfare and other forms of intergroup conflict. But is that nature or nurture? Are men just inherently more aggressive and tribal? Or is it simply how society has shaped them over centuries?
It's a complex question.
Yeah.
And the answer likely involves a bit of both.
Right.
But the research points to some compelling evolutionary reasons why men might have a more pronounced tribal psychology.
Okay.
It all boils down to the different roles men and women played in our evolutionary past.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Okay.
What does the evolutionary perspective say about these potential differences?
Well, let's start with mating strategies.
Okay.
Throughout human history, men who could demonstrate strength, courage, and the ability to protect the group would have been more attractive to potential mates.
Okay.
Success in intergroup conflict, even if it carried significant risks, could boost a man's status and make him more desirable.
So it's like the classic hero archetype.
Right.
The brave warrior who wins the day and as a bonus gets the girl.
Yeah.
I can see how that would have played out in a tribal setting.
Yeah.
But what about women?
Right.
Wouldn't they have benefited from strong protectors too?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But for women, the risks associated with direct combat would have been much higher. They faced the added burden of pregnancy and childcare, making them more vulnerable. Their survival and reproductive success were more closely tied to maintaining social harmony, nurturing relationships, and ensuring the safety of their children.
So a division of labor, in a sense. Men on the front lines, competing for resources and status, while women focused on building community and raising the next generation.
Exactly.
But is that really biology? Or is it just social conditioning? Haven't we moved beyond those traditional gender roles?
We have.
Yeah.
To a large extent. But here's the key point.
Okay.
Evolution doesn't just shape our bodies. It shapes our minds as well. It's highly unlikely that evolution would have sculpted such distinct physical differences between men and women while leaving their brains, their psychology completely untouched. Just as men and women evolve different physical traits to suit their role. It's plausible that their brains, their instincts, their ways of thinking would also reflect those different evolutionary pressures.
So you're saying that even though we've made progress in challenging traditional gender roles, there might still be some deep-seated biological differences in how men and women experience and express these tribal instincts.
That's what the male warrior hypothesis suggests.
Okay.
And there's actually quite a bit of evidence to support it.
Oh, really?
Shall we explore some of those findings?
Absolutely. Let's dive into the research and see what the science has to say about these male warrior instincts. All right, we're ready to unpack this male warrior hypothesis. Where do we even begin to look for evidence of these ingrained differences?
Well, we can start by observing how men and women perceive intergroup situations, how they see us and them. Research suggests that men tend to view these interactions as more competitive and even hostile right off the bat. Remember that discontinuity effect we discussed earlier, where groups are more competitive than individuals?
Yeah.
Studies show this effect is often stronger in men.
So men are more likely to see a rival of them to compete against, even if it's not really necessary. Like their brains are primed for that us versus them dynamic.
That's what the research suggests.
Yeah.
One study even had men and women recall social interactions from their own lives.
Okay.
And men consistently rated their group-on-group interactions as way more competitive than women did. It's like they're seeing the world through a slightly more combative lens.
That's interesting, but couldn't you argue that maybe men are just more competitive in general?
Right.
Regardless of whether it's a group or individual situation? How do we know it's specifically related to that tribal instinct?
That's a great question, and researchers have looked into that as well.
Yeah.
They found that while men might be more competitive in some individual contexts, that difference gets magnified when it's a group versus group scenario. It's like that tribal instinct kicks in and ramps up the competitive drive.
Yeah, they're not just playing for themselves, they're playing for the team, for the tribe. That sense of group identity intensifies everything.
Exactly.
So we've got this potential difference in perception.
Right.
But what about emotional responses? Do men and women react differently to conflict?
There's evidence for that as well. The same study that looked at recalled social interactions also asked people about their feelings towards warfare. And consistently, men rated warfare as more exciting, more useful, and even less unpleasant than women did.
That is a pretty stark contrast. Are you suggesting that men are more comfortable with the idea of conflict? Even violence?
It's not necessarily about being comfortable with violence, but perhaps seeing it as a more acceptable or even inevitable part of intergroup relations. And this difference in perception can have real-world consequences. Public opinion polls consistently show greater support for military action among men compared to women.
Yeah, you definitely see that gender gap in polls about war and other issues involving intergroup conflict. It's like men are more likely to take that fight approach while women are more inclined towards diplomacy and negotiation.
That's a common observation.
Oh.
And it ties into another aspect of the male warrior hypothesis, the idea that men are more likely to step up and help their in-group when faced with an external threat. Think of that classic band of brothers mentality.
Yeah.
Protecting your own when the going gets tough.
I can see how that would have been crucial for survival in our evolutionary past.
Right.
When a rival tribe attacks, you need the men in your group to be ready and willing to defend everyone else.
Exactly. And there's experimental evidence to support this as well. One study used a game called the public goods game, where participants can contribute money to a common pool, knowing they might not get anything back in return. It's a test of altruism and cooperation.
So it's about how much people are willing to sacrifice for the good of the group.
Right. And they created two versions of the game. One where individuals played against each other, and one where they played as part of a group competing against other groups. And the results were really interesting. Men were much more likely to contribute to the common pool when they were competing as part of a group, while women's contributions remained relatively consistent across both conditions.
So the men really upped their game when it was us versus them. That sense of intergroup competition brought out their more altruistic, cooperative side.
Precisely. And this ties into those classic warrior virtues: bravery, heroism, the willingness to take risks and sacrifice for the good of the tribe. We tend to associate these traits more with men. And it makes sense from an evolutionary perspective. In a tribal setting, men were often the ones putting themselves in harm's way to defend the group.
It makes you wonder how much of this is hardwired versus learned. Are boys just naturally drawn to those stories of brave heroes and epic battles?
It's a classic nature versus nurture debate. And the answer is likely a complex combination of both. But there's another intriguing piece of evidence to consider. The male warrior hypothesis also predicts that men, having evolved in a world of constant intergroup competition, should be more comfortable with the idea of hierarchies between groups,
Okay.
with some groups being more dominant than others.
So men are more accepting of inequality between groups.
Not necessarily accepting, but perhaps more likely to see it as a natural or even inevitable outcome of intergroup dynamics. And there's a scale that researchers use to measure people's attitudes towards social dominance, and guess what?
What?
Men consistently score higher than women.
It's like those dominance hierarchies you see in the animal kingdom with alpha males and pecking orders. So are you saying that men are just inherently more hierarchical in their thinking?
It's not that simple. It's more about recognizing that men and women might have different perspectives on intergroup dynamics shaped by our evolutionary history. Remember, the male warrior hypothesis doesn't suggest that women were passive bystanders in all of this. They had their own crucial roles to play, focusing on building community, nurturing relationships, and ensuring the survival of future generations.
So it's not about saying one approach is better than the other,
Right.
but recognizing that men and women might have different instincts, different ways of navigating these complex intergroup dynamics. It's like two sides of the same coin, both essential for the survival and success of the tribe.
Exactly. But this brings up an important question. If we humans are so deeply programmed for this tribal mentality, this us versus them, thinking, can we ever truly move beyond it? Can we create a world where those tribal instincts don't lead to conflict, prejudice, and division?
That's the million-dollar question. Is it even possible to rewire our brains to overcome those ancient evolutionary impulses?
It's definitely a challenge, but I believe it's possible. Remember, the human brain is incredibly adaptable. We're not just slaves to our instincts. We have the capacity for empathy, reason, and cooperation, even with those we perceive as different.
So there's hope, but how do we tap into that better side of our nature? How do we override those tribal instincts that can lead us astray?
The first step is awareness. Understanding the evolutionary roots of our tribal psychology is crucial. It's not about excusing bad behavior, but recognizing the powerful forces at play. Once we understand those forces, we can start to make more conscious, deliberate choices about how we interact with us and them.
So it's about shining a light on those subconscious biases and saying, hey, I see you there. You're not calling the shots anymore.
Exactly. Education is key. Teaching people about these concepts, the tribal instinct hypothesis, the male warrior hypothesis, the science behind how our brains process group dynamics can help us recognize those knee-jerk reactions and challenge those ingrained stereotypes.
Knowledge is power. But education alone isn't enough, right? What else can we do to bridge those divides and build a more inclusive world?
We need to create more opportunities for positive intergroup contact. Remember, research has shown that when people from different groups work together towards a common goal, it can chip away at those prejudices. Think about collaborative projects, community initiatives, even just having meaningful conversations with people from different backgrounds. These experiences help us see each other as individuals, not just representatives of some other group.
It's about finding common ground, building relationships, and recognizing that we're all part of the same human tribe, even if we sometimes forget.
Beautifully put.
Yeah.
And this isn't just some feel-good idealism. Understanding our tribal instincts has practical implications for so many areas of life, from managing conflict and promoting peace to creating more just and equitable societies.
It's been quite a journey. We've gone deep into the evolutionary roots of tribalism, explored the complexities of the male warrior hypothesis, and even glimpsed a path toward a more inclusive future.
And despite all the challenges, what I find most hopeful is that we're not just hardwired for conflict. We also have an incredible capacity for cooperation, compassion, and love, even for those outside our immediate group. It's a matter of recognizing those better angels of our nature and actively choosing to cultivate them.
That's a perfect note to end on. So as we resurface from this deep dive into the world of tribalism, I encourage you to keep exploring this topic, challenge your own biases, and find ways to build bridges in your own lives. Remember, the journey towards a more peaceful, inclusive world starts with each of us.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time, keep diving deep.